Hello, my name is David Cole, and welcome to the house of David. And you're in my man cave. And hadn't really been thinking about this, but I wanted to put it on tape again because I said it on the other one. I will never ask you for an offering, and if anybody uses my video or whatever to ask you for money, don't give it, because I didn't ask for any money, because they're doing it just to be crooked. Now, I wanted to say that because the gospel is supposed to be free, and you never ask for money. I've had situations where, probably 25, 30 years ago, I had a black lady call me and somebody had given her my phone number. I don't know the lady to this day, but she asked me about a gentleman that had a church over in East Gadsden, and he wanted $100, I think it was, to pray for her. And he told her to go back in the back room back there, and he would pray for her, but he wanted $100 first, and evidently she didn't have the $100, and she didn't think it right, one or the other, but she called me, and I told her, nope. I said, the gospel is free. The Bible said, freely you receive, freely give. So I'll never ask you for a dime. Now, what I told you earlier on the other video, that I would talk to you about the prophets, the prophetic path, or you could call it the prophetic road, however you want to. But now, I also pointed out to you on that other video that I used Mark 11:23 and created a road, a path for my wife to come back to me. Now, this would be used, and I think it was, I said in either Job 21 or 22, if my memory serves me correct, decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. And that's what I did. I used Mark 11:23 to decree that my wife would live and not die, and I created a path for my wife to get off a deathbed and come back to my house, and basically to my arms. Now, see, that's what God wants for you, because many of you lost your way. You're going to these churches where they're cold and they're dead, and you think you're all right. And like I said, they got the TV screens up. They got all the places in there where you can eat and drink and just basically go to show. And they'll put on a show for you, and you'll pay them, and they're getting rich off of you. But see, the point is, you've left your first love, because Spirit of God won't stay in those churches long if they get started in that direction. He'll move out of there, and it'll become a place where you will go, and you'll just kind of enjoy yourself, enjoy the fellowship and all that. But you've completely left your first love if that's what you're doing, because that's exactly what the Ephesian church did, and that's what the church in Samaria did. In fact, God pointed it out, I think, in 3 different times, and I believe it was in chapter 4. Let me show you what he said. Let me get down to it. He said some other things first, but it won't take up too much time on this. Let me just show you what he said in verse 6. Amos 4:6. You know, don't you, that I'm the one who emptied your pantry, cleaned out your cupboards, who left you hungry and standing in the bread lines. But you never got hungry for me. You continued to ignore me, God's decree. Yes, I'm the one that stopped the rains 3 months short of harvest. I make it rain on one village and not on another. Why? Because one village is doing right and the other's not. I make it rain on one field but not on another. Why? Because one man is doing right and the other is not. And that one would dry up. People would stagger from village to village. And now listen, 3 times he said, you did not hunger, you did not thirst for me. This is the second time. People would stagger from village to village, crazed for water and never quenching their thirst. But you never got thirsty from me. You ignored me, God's decree. I hit your crops with disease and withered your orchards and gardens. By the way, I'm reading from the Message translation. It just comes out a lot plainer than the King James does. Locusts devoured your olive and fig trees, but you continued to ignore me, God's decree. I revisited you with the old Egyptian plagues, killed your choice young men and prize horses. The stink of the rot in your camps was so strong, you had to hold your nose. But you didn't notice me. You continued to ignore me, God's decree. I hit you with an earthquake and fire. What's he doing now? I'm fixing to play some video here, or audio here, from Robin Bullock and from Hank Kuhneman, and maybe just do part of the one on Hank Kuhneman, because I don't know if I'll have enough time on this video. But they're talking about these same things. They're talking about earthquakes. They're talking about boom, 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 like bombs going off, or something or other. And then he said there were burnings. And he said, I hit you with earthquake and fire, left you devastated like Sodom and Gomorrah. You were like a burning stick snatched from the flames. But you never looked my way. You continued to ignore me. All this I've done to you, Israel, and this is why I've done it. Time's up, Israel. Prepare to meet your God. Now, I want to say this again so some people will not misunderstand what I'm saying. Now, on the other video, I started out with reading what Julie Green said, and one of the things she talked about was darkness, and that darkness was on the land now, but the darkness that was coming for evildoers, not the Christians. So look at it this way: America is not being judged the way Sodom and Gomorrah was, but now it's the wicked that's being judged. Because if you followed the one from Julie Green, when she gave out the prophecy about those people that were crooked on the voting and all that, God said to the mayors, the governors, and all the people involved in all that, I'm coming for you. Now, this is the prophetic path that I'm talking about. You see, God cannot do anything unless the prophets speak it. I said that on the other video. See, God has to have authority in the earth. And I remember Hank Kuhneman talking on the other audio that I put on my phone. And he said this. He said God showed him that Donald Trump was going to get COVID, and that he would have to leave the campaign trail, and he did. And anyway, he said Donald Trump was going to have to pray and seek God, because God needed his will and his permission to do some things in the earth, because he's the leader of our nation. And Trump came back afterward and said, I've never prayed more than I have in all my life. He just spent his time praying and seeking God. And see, now that's the reason why God is using these prophets and showing you a prophetic path. Now, I could go into some of that. I may not make another video on some of those things. I may not have enough time on this one today, but I want to show you a prophetic path for the people of Samaria in 2 Kings. Now, in 2 Kings verse 30, it said, it came to pass when the king heard the words of the woman that he rent his clothes, and as he passed by upon the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth within upon his flesh. Now, You have to understand that Ben-Hadad, or however Ben-Hadad, or whatever you call him, he was the king of Syria, and he had came and brought his army and encompassed that entire city. Now famine was going through that city. You got to ask yourself, why? Because of wickedness, because of sin, and it had gone on long enough that it had to be judged. And it had to, God allowed those people to go through that to get their attention. Now God's doing this today, right now. Everything that we've been going through, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. But the people of America have to turn to God. They cannot keep worshiping these heathen gods. Now, I'm going to say this, and it's probably going to make a lot of the Christians mad. I want to ask you a question about Halloween. You dress your kids up in demonic garb, and you put pumpkins out there with all kind of carved and devilish faces and all kinds of t-shirts with demonic type spirits on it. Now, the Bible tells us, how can two walk together except they be agreed? And that was in Amos. Now, this translation from the Message translation said, how can two walk hand in hand unless they're going to the same place? And I submit to you that when you're trafficking in demon spirits and dealing with Halloween, doing what you're doing, that it's wrong. Now, see, a lot of people don't see that as wrong. But that's another one of the pagan things. I want to ask you this. Now, if you were in heaven and you wanted to observe Halloween, do you think God would allow you to have demonic creatures and a horror house and have your children dress up in this kind of garb? This is the stuff that goes on in today's church, and it's a heathen worship. Now, this is why we don't see the power of God moving in our churches. But let me go on with this, because the reason God allows these things to come, it's to turn the people back to God and get away from heathen, the way the heathen worship. Well, let me put it another way. Maybe you can understand it better. When the world and the church come together and they start walking side by side, you can't tell them apart. And so they don't have any trouble. The churches today don't have any trouble with a homosexual walking in and wanting to be ordained as a priest or as a preacher. They don't have any trouble with transgender. They don't have any trouble with a preacher committing adultery or wife swapping. And a lot of stuff is going on in the church. And this is why when a nation loses its way, and it lost its way because of the church. So God always begins to deal with the church first. Judgment will begin at the house of God. And if judgment begins at the house of God, where shall the sinner and the ungodly appear? Now the ungodly is the one that gets the most grievous punishment. But the sinner is not going to be left out of it. But anyway, let me go ahead with this. Now, it made the king mad when she told him, well, we boiled my son yesterday, and we ate him. And I said to her, today's your day. And she said, and give thy son that we may eat him. And she's hid her son. You understand? She's saying, that ugly thing hid her son so we couldn't eat him today. Now you understand why they were being brought to a place of humbleness. They're being surrounded by that army. No food is getting in and out of there. But they had a man of God there that could have changed that situation at any time. All they'd had to do was speak it. And that's called the prophetic path. If that man begins to speak it, it'll come to pass. It may not come to pass the way you think it will, as quick as you think it will, but it's always going to be God that's going to give that man the utterance. And when he speaks it, it's going to come to pass. Now let's go just a little bit further. Watch the king. He got mad about it. He said, God do so and more also to me, if the head of Elijah, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day. But Elijah sat in his house, and the elders sat with him. Now the elders, I looked that word up, and it said elders, but it also had the word senators. So this may have been some of the higher ups in the city were there before Elijah. And they sat with him, and the king sent a man from before him. But ere the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, See how this son of a murderer hath sent to take away mine head? Look, when this messenger cometh, shut the door, hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? And while he yet talked with them, behold, the messenger came down unto him, and said unto him, Behold, this evil is of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer? Now, he's just saying I'm in sackcloth and ashes, and I've been doing what I'm supposed to do. But see, his heart ain't right, because he's ready to cut the head of Elijah off. Because Elijah, he said it's his fault. Because Elijah, it's his fault. He's the prophet. Now, I want you to watch this. You got to be careful when you attack a prophet, because the Bible said, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. And you got to be careful when you do, because this man lost his life because of the way he talked to this prophet. Now, while I'm on that subject there, I could have went deeper into this here. There's more things in it, but I just wanted to cover the prophetic path. Let's look at what took place back in Moses' time. Now, God said, I'll speak to the prophets by visions and dreams and so forth. But he said to Moses, I appeared to him face to face. Moses had an intimacy with God that his sister and brother did not like. God prefers him better. And they began to talk about Moses. And when they did, it brought judgment on them. I don't have time to go into all of it. Some of the judgment didn't come right away. But sometimes God will do things, and it may be years down the road before it happened. And I'll give you an illustration real quick. I remember a situation that happened in the Old Testament, and it happened to David. And David told Solomon on his deathbed, now, when I'm dead, you cut this man's head off, or you kill him. And Solomon carried out his father's wishes. But that man was deceitful and done something, but David couldn't do anything about it at the time because of his political situation. But anyway, judgment is going to come. And now, he said, this messenger came to him and said, Behold, this evil is from the Lord. Now, you see, they were seeing all that was taking place there, the famine and everything else, as God's fault. And that prophet's fault. And they were blaming the prophet. Same thing that now the church is doing right now, and a lot of them are attacking our prophets. Hank Kuhneman, Robin Bullock, and Julie Green. There's others, but those are three that I listen to probably the most and have the most confidence in. But if I knew some of the others and listened to what they said, I might have more confidence in them. I just haven't been able to get hooked up where I can watch them. But now, let's look at what happened. Now, when this happened, then Elijah said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gates of Samaria. Now I want you to watch what I'm talking about. I said be careful when you go talking about the prophets. In fact, the Bible tells you ought not be talking about nobody. Now the only way, and this is the only way, that I will call out a man's name, if he denies the virgin birth, if he denies the blood, and if he denies the cross, and denies the fact that you need to be born again, then I will call his name out, because that's pure poison, and I will warn you to stay away from it. But now, if it's like in this case here, you hear a prophet saying something, and let's say it doesn't come to pass, they could have missed it. But if you go to talking about them, God said you're going to be judged by the same judgment. And I would suggest that you go read the Acts. I think it's the 17th chapter, maybe the 14th, but I believe it's 17th chapter, where Paul went in there to preach to the Romans, I think it was. And anyway, the sign was there to the unknown God. He went in and said, to this unknown God, whom you ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. Then went on to say that all these people did all day long was to live to hear some new story or to tell it. And if this is not America, I don't know what it is. Because everybody gets on Facebook. And last night, my wife said, somebody put on what are you watching on TV? And they're just going back and forth and talking about this, talking about that. And all you're doing is bragging on the devil. And then you wonder why, when you're bragging on the devil, doing all these other things, that wonder why God punished America. Not necessarily the Christians, but he said the evil, well, it was to punish those that were wicked and ungodly. Those that lie to you, steal from you, kill you if necessary. And they never think a good thought, only evil continuously. That's why God has started this in America, to clean it up. And see, you're going to have to examine yourself and see where you're at. See if you're living right. And ask yourself, well, let me tell you what the Bible said. Examine yourself, see whether you be in the faith or not. Because don't fall into the trap that this man did, because here he was supposed to be part of the church and everything else, because I can show you the scripture where they were religious and doing all the religious stuff, but I'm not going to do it because it'll take me away from what I'm doing. I'm showing you a prophetic path. I'm showing you the man of God said, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gates of Samaria. Now I want you to listen to what this man on whose hand the king leaned. He was right up there, the king's right-hand man. And he answered the man of God. And listen to the way he did it. He kind of ridiculed him. And he said, if God opened the windows of heaven and all this stuff started falling down, how could this thing be? And Elijah said to him, behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof. And then the story goes on to tell about the 4 lepers and how God magnified the sound of them heading toward that camp, and all that whole army host ran off and left everything. They were so scared. They thought the king of Israel had hired a great army, and so they ran off and left everything. Now we get over to where the king, after they had sent these men out, and they come back and said, we went all the way to the River Jordan. They're dropping weapons, food, everything, and so they ain't nowhere around. So the king appointed the Lord on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate, and the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died as the man of God had said, who spake when the king came down to him. And it came to pass, as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 measures of barley for a shekel. Now here's your prophetic path. You need to be careful when you start talking about prophets and you start putting them down, because the past and the government's pulled down here. You're going to have egg on your face, and you may have God on your case. He said, 2 measures of barley for a shekel, and a measure of fine flour for a shekel shall be tomorrow about this time in the gates of Samaria. And the Lord answered the man of God, Now, behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, might such a thing be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof. And so it fell unto him, for the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died. He was sent down there to control the thing, but the people were so hungry, and they stampeded him, ran over him, and trampled him to death. And his own mouth is what killed him. So you got to understand, words you say, God hears. Words you say, the devil hears. And the devil's the one that kills. And he didn't care about that man. And all those people that were in there were basically had been following the devil. Look, if you're going to have a woman that's willing to boil her son and eat him with the neighbor, and then get mad at the neighbor because that neighbor won't give her son up to be eaten, do you see how far down they've fallen? And that's the wickedness. And God looks at wickedness, and I'm telling you, there's a lot more wickedness than what this was. Because right now, with more things coming out about the pedophilia, the trafficking of children, and the murder of children. Not just the abortions, not just them, but the fact that children are being butchered and massacred, all for a heathen god, Baal, and Baal worshippers, right here in the United States. And according to the prophets, this stuff is going to start coming out, and when it does, make sure you don't have egg on your face. Make sure that you've not went after these prophets and cursed them. Because if you do, the Bible said you're going to be judged with the same judgment. And remember, God's judgment don't always come right the next moment. What a man sows, that's what he reaps.